Hey friends, welcome back to my channel, Zach's Curiosity. I'm Zakir and I'm an embedded software engineer working in an automotive company. You have ever wondered how an illness can be a cure? Vaccines are mild infections that are eradicating infectious diseases around the world. Mass vaccinations are saving millions of lives every year. To uncover the mystery behind it, let's dive into vaccines in this episode of Zach's Curiosity. In 400 BC, Hippocrates, after whom the Hippocratic oath taken by doctors is named, pointed out that bad smelling waters of swamps and lakes and the air above them is unwholesome. This bad air and water are the reasons behind infectious diseases. Influenced by this idea, Romans avoided setting up military camps next to swamps and marshes. This idea also gave rise to a now obsolete theory known as miasma theory. Miasma is Greek for pollution, and the theory held that epidemics were caused by miasma, that is, bad air resulting from rotting organic matter. During the Black Death pandemic across Europe in the 14th century, the first form of personal protective equipment and social distancing was seen. French physician Charles Delorme invented these PPEs for plague doctors, the design of which was influenced by miasma theory. Though miasma theory gave rise to early versions of face masks and social distancing, it did not explain the root cause of the spread of plague, and no one knew that it was through flea bites. Before the invention of compound microscope, an early form of vaccination was in practice known as variolation. The method was an attempt to save human life from smallpox that plagued humanity for over 1,000 years with its mortality rate of 30%. It is one of the two infectious diseases that have been eradicated, the other being rinderpest. Smallpox caused initial symptoms of fever and vomiting, then rashes, followed by pus-filled bumps with a dent in the center called pustules. These pustules eventually left behind dry scabs of skin. In China, physicians would make a powder of the scab tissue left on a recovered patient's skin. Healthy individuals then inhaled this powder, which caused a milder version of the disease, from which they were more likely to improve. This patient would then be immune to future infections of smallpox. This practice then spread to Europe, Africa, and even America. Those were the days when mothers visited families whose children had already infected by the disease to buy the pus from the pustules. This pus had a price, and after some bargaining, they purchased the disease. The event that revolutionized the medical science was the invention of compound microscope, and one of its inventors was Antony van Leeuwenhoek, a Dutch cloth merchant who used his version of a lens to ensure the quality of the goods. He studied microorganisms and was the first to describe bacteria. Finally, the notion of existence of tiny, invisible life forms was confirmed. Leeuwenhoek is known as the father of microbiology for this contribution. Early developments of vaccines all started with the discovery of a new way to prevent smallpox. Edward Jenner, an army doctor from England, came across a rural-urban legend that dairy workers never got smallpox because they had already contacted cowpox, a mild disease transmitted from cows to humans. Locals were deliberately getting exposed to cowpox to save themselves from smallpox. Jenner collected the stuff from the skin of a milkmaid who had already recovered from cowpox and injected it into his gardener's son. The boy developed fever as well as rash but recovered quickly. He then deliberately exposed the boy to smallpox, and the boy showed no symptoms of the disease. This experiment was the first successful vaccine trial conducted in history. He published his experiment in 1798 and called this immunization procedure as vaccination, from the Latin word vacca for the cow. Jenner's vaccination was accepted worldwide as a safe alternative to variolation. Though Jenner's experiment gave an idea that a significant disease can be prevented by introducing a milder version of it, the root cause of the disease was still unknown. In 1881, Louis Pasteur, a chemistry professor, publicly demonstrated the use of a weakened version of anthrax on several farm animals. A fortnight later, he infected these animals with live and healthy anthrax bacteria. A few days later, the animals were still alive and healthy. He then went on to develop the vaccine for rabies, still unaware of the microorganisms that are responsible for the infection. By this time, these evidences of the presence of some microorganisms finally replaced the 1,000-year-old miasma theory of infectious diseases with the currently accepted germ theory. The concept of some diseases caused by germs that we take granted was not easy to convince the scientific community and the general public that tiny invisible microorganisms are responsible for creating all these infectious diseases. Although Louis Pasteur and Edward Jenner successfully developed the first vaccines to protect against viral infections, they were unaware of viruses. A breakthrough in identifying viruses was the invention of a filter by Charles Chamberlain known as Chamberlain filter in 1898 that had pores small enough to retain bacteria. Dmitry Ivanovsky used this filter to prove that a sap of a deceased tobacco plant remained infectious even after the bacteria were removed. Martinus Beigerin called this invisible species for the very first time in the history as virus. With the invention of electron microscope in 1937, scientists saw viruses for the very first time, and this demystified the reason behind the infections other than that of bacteria, which led to advanced studies on virology. One of the advanced vaccines produced was for one of the deadliest viruses that plagued humankind, polio. While most people recovered this disease, it left the patients crippled and even paralyzed for the rest of their lives. A severe symptom of polio is paralysis of the diaphragm resulting in weakened lungs, and the patients had to be kept alive enclosed in machines called iron lungs. One such victim was June Margaret Middleton, who spent 60 years in an iron lung. Efforts of World Health Organization helped to eradicate polio, except for it being endemic in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Having this rough idea of how a vaccine works, let us deep dive into its mechanism at the cellular level. The human body has two immune systems, the innate immune system, which is a generic, and an adaptive immune system that is customized and specific. The skin and the mucous membranes are frontline soldiers against microbes that attempt to cross the border and enter the body. If they manage to cross the border, there are cells known as macrophages that fight the infiltrators. If these cells could not continue the fight, it sends out chemical signals calling out for reinforcements. Then bone marrow sends out specialized white blood cells to fight and physically destroy bacteria, parasites, and even cancer cells. This generic immune system is the innate immune system. One more immune system is an adaptive immune system that identifies threats and remembers them in its memory. Macrophages fail to deal with viruses in most of the cases, so the body produces specialized white blood cells known as T cells and B cells. B cells produces antibodies, which are protein appendages capable of identifying antigens, which are specific molecular structures on the surface of foreign body. Viruses have few antigens and bacteria can have hundreds. B cells are smart enough to detect over 100 million antigens. This mechanism of antibodies binding to antigens results in destruction of the disease. On the other hand, T cells can read messages from macrophages and inform B cells for an attack. The antibodies thus produced prevents the viruses from entering cells and also neutralize the harmful chemicals produced by the bacteria. T and B cells remain inside the body after the infection is gone. They remember the fight and are ready for action in case of reinfection. For this reason, they are also known as memory cells. So vaccination is a process to train the germ-fighting cells with milder, harmless infections as a preparation to fight in real battles during an actual disease. I hope now we know what vaccines are and how they work. To watch more videos like this, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. See you in the next video. Till then, take care and stay safe.